Okay, I gave you to read the In re sealed case decision. This is a FISA Court of Review decision from 2002. And so this is an appellate level federal decision, not a circuit court, but the FISA Court of Review set up under the FISA statute. And what I wanted you to look at there is some of the background of the statute, but also this challenge to the constitutionality of the statute. And notice that this challenge is against the background of the change in the Patriot Act that sort of shrinks the probable cause requirement to simply, the probable cause and the certification requirement to simply require the government to show that it involves a foreign power or an agent of foreign power, but really kind of minimizing that. And, the court has a bunch of language about the fact that there is this kind of dire need to protect the citizens in light of the 9/11 attack, and that the balance really under the Fourth Amendment is a reasonableness balance. And this particular court saying that the balance struck by Congress under the FISA statute, given the terror threats that we see after 9/11, that the balance was reasonable. So the Fourth Amendment doesn't necessarily require the criminal level of probable cause in every circumstance. And the Supreme Court's prior jurisprudence involving surveillance doesn't necessarily require the highest showing of probable cause. It simply requires some judicial oversight. And here, the FISA Court of Review found this reasonable. Now, again, we'll talk about this a little bit more in class tomorrow as well as into next week. There have been other challenges to this statute outside of this FISA Court of Review case. I gave you the Clapper case to read. The Clapper case was a challenge after a lot of this information came to light, brought by the ACLU on behalf of a variety of public interest groups. And as you can see from the opinion, the U.S. Supreme Court ultimately decided that those groups lacked standing to pursue their challenge to the statute because they couldn't show specifically how their information had been obtained. There was another challenge in a case called Clayman versus Obama, in which a district court in federal district court in the District of Columbia, in fact, found the FISA statute as amended in the bulk metadata surveillance program unconstitutional. There was an application for an emergency stay of that order to the federal circuit for the D.C. Circuit. The stay was granted, and in the meantime, as I'll show you in a moment, the bulk metadata collection program expired and then was curtailed by Congress. So it never has reached the U.S. Supreme Court, and it also has never reached on the merits a higher level court. So you can see this decision, the debate is kind of still out there of whether, in fact, this program really was constitutional. Okay, the last thing I want to show you for the purpose of this lecture is some information about the USA Freedom Act of 2015. And again, I haven't given you this to read yet. I'm going to give you some excerpts to read of this for next week. This statute was signed by President Obama on June 2nd, 2015. And the backdrop of this is that the Patriot Act amendments to the FISA statute that allowed the bulk metadata collection program to proceed as it did under the orders of the FISA court were set to expire. Congress had to consider whether they were going to extend those authorities or not. And as we'll talk about a little bit more in class and then some more next week, you'll see that Congress did extend some of that to some extent, but it placed some limits on the ability of the federal government to collect this bulk telephony data. And effectively what it does now is it allows orders that require the telecom carriers to retain the information. So to be held by the telecom carriers, not to be held by the government, and then allows the government to access pieces of that information under certain circumstances. Some civil liberties groups viewed this as somewhat of a victory, but many recognize that there's a lot of ambiguity here, and this relates back to one of our big themes that I think is important for us to kind of talk about and think about, which is that when we're dealing with the internet, the infrastructure is largely privately held. The information that's crossing over that infrastructure is crossing with our consent over these privately held wires. How does that and that aspect of what we might call internet governance relate to the governance of our nation and the national security of our nation? And how does all of that relate to our expectations of privacy and our First Amendment interests? Is it better for these private telecoms to hold all this data and have the government be able to come and take pieces of it? Is it better for the government to hold it under FISA-type procedures and have the government be able to take pieces of it? Is it better for no one to hold it and have the government have to make the showing of a wiretap or other kind of more traditional order? All of those things are matters of debate. So now I'm just going to show you real briefly here some information from Edward Snowden's dump of the NSA files. And there's some really interesting slides from the NSA showing some aspects of the NSA's surveillance program and how extensive it is that Snowden disclosed. And there's really no debate now, nobody would really debate that it truly was extensive. And it's fascinating, and depending on how you look at it, chilling or comforting or both, to see the extent to which the NSA was looking into the technologies and tapping into the technologies and having this overlay of collection that it was doing, on the one hand authorized by the FISA court, and on another hand in some circumstances pursuant to direct presidential authority. That's very debatable. So I'm just going to flip through these really kind of quickly. We'll talk about a few of them in class. You can also find some of them online, but I just want you to kind of see the scope of the activity.